Hi, everyone. Thank you for introducing me, Beata. I'm going to be talking to you for the next half hour about solo aging. Again, as Beata said, it's something that I've been very interested in for about the past 10 years. I've written a book on it, and I really dedicate most of my life to raising awareness about solo aging. So what I'd like to do is to share my screen and walk you through some of what I've discovered over the last few years about solo aging and why I think you should care about it. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of the challenges of solo aging, and I want to tell you how I got involved in it. My husband and I do not have children. And about, I don't know, 15 years ago, I started noticing that a great number of people that I ran into every day, some of my friends and colleagues, people I worked with, were spending a tremendous amount of time taking care of their parents who were then in their 80s, 90s, even early 100s. And it was using up a tremendous amount of their time, energy, resources. But they were doing a good job, in some cases flying across country to ensure that their parents were safely taken care of, either in a senior living facility, or somebody coming into their home, or in some cases making sure that their parents, if they lived locally, had enough food for the week, taking them to appointments, just doing all kinds of things to support their parents. And I was having a glass of wine with a friend of mine who also doesn't have children. At one point I said, "Sandy, who's going to do that for us?" And the answer was, of course, crickets. There is no good answer to who is going to do that for people who do not have children. And that's when I started to do some research on solo aging, as I began to call it, to see what had been done in the past, or to see what, if anything, there was organized today to help people who didn't have children. So I'm going to show you what I have found, and over the years, what I have come up with as the best way that solo agers themselves can meet the challenge that confronts them probably in a few years, because we're really talking more about the baby boom generation than anyone else. They are the elders now, and they will be only getting older in the very near future. So let me at least first kind of further define what I mean by a solo ager. It isn't just people who don't have children, but it's really anyone who's traveling through life without the support of a traditional family. And more today, we have lots of those people. I suspect that some of you may be solo agers. I suspect that all of you at some level know a solo ager, whether there's somebody in your family or someone that you work with, somebody that you consider a friend or a colleague that either has no children, lives alone, their children live very far away. Sometimes people don't get along with their children. They're estranged from them in some way. So any of these categories may in fact come under the heading of solo agers. And the point of this is that anyone who comes into any of these categories really needs to think about the future and think about what's coming in the years ahead so that you can do some good planning. Why is the baby boom generation the first generation to ever have to worry about this? Well, for a couple reasons. One, the baby boom generation hit a real low in birth rates. In fact, the rate at which baby boomer women had children was only at about 80%. So what that means is when you see a baby boomer female, that person has a 1 in 5 chance of having never had kids. 1 in 5 of the baby boomer women you know doesn't have kids. And that, again, that's just the people who don't have children. All those other categories make it even higher. So putting that into more realistic terms, we're talking about 19 million people in the baby boom, just in the baby boom generation alone, who we would consider solo agers. It's also important for us to acknowledge that more people than ever today live alone. Of the older adults that live alone, the US has the greatest percentage in the entire world. So if you can see in this fairly busy chart where I have the little circle, 27% of people over 60 live alone. That means not only no kids around, but no spouse, no partner, no roommate, just living alone. Now, some of those people may in fact have children that may live nearby, and in that respect, they may not in fact be solo agers. So you can kind of see a lot of these circles kind of intersect and overlap like a Venn diagram. But all in all, we're talking about a good 30 to 35% of the population being included in some way as a solo ager. So looking more at what the research tells us, the most important person in an older person's life is their spouse or partner, if they have one. And you probably saw this yourself if your own parents aged together, if they were still married, and both of them lived into their at least 70s and maybe 80s or 90s, you probably watched this. They depended on one another. And we see this so often, both in senior living environments and just in the population at large. Great dependency. When it comes to solo agers who do have spouses like me and my husband, if we depend too much on each other, then we're not preparing well for the future. So when I talk to a group of solo agers, I always encourage them to look beyond your spouse. It's great that you have a partner or a spouse that you live with. That's wonderful, but we don't have a crystal ball. And the reason why I call married people who don't have children solo agers is because one is going to predecease the other. There's no doubt about that. My husband and I acknowledge that. Unless we get hit by the same bus on the same day, one of us is going to be a true solo ager living alone, or hopefully not alone, in the future. So married or not, anybody who doesn't have children, I put in a solo ager category. Research also tells us that beyond children, just blood relatives in general are viewed as the only real source of support. And what the anthropologists call this is morally obligated support. So if you look back through history, or maybe even through the history of your own family, you can see that in the past, families took care of their own. We still see that, but not as much. We see families being scattered all over the globe, and we see families that have been torn apart by a lot of different things. So the level at which a particular solo ager has this support from blood relatives can vary a lot. But the reality is that most solo agers that I've talked to and that I've spoken to over the last 10 years don't have a lot of family support. So again, we have to look elsewhere for that kind of support. Now, if you're at all involved in the world of retirement and aging, you have probably seen these statistics before. That the risks of isolation and loneliness are huge. And of course, we've all experienced that over the last year plus, what isolation and loneliness can do. But even before COVID-19, we were looking at the incidence of isolation and loneliness among older adults. And we discovered that through many factors, it leads to a higher mortality level, earlier mortality, and cognitive decline as well. Isolated and older adults are vulnerable to a lot of different emotional and physical maladies. They're also vulnerable to elder abuse because they are on their own. They're also vulnerable to depression. They've correlated high blood pressure with isolation and loneliness. And the only thing that doesn't go up, that goes down, is physical and mental health. So a lot of the kinds of things that we all want to avoid as we get older have been very well correlated with isolation and loneliness. So that's I think it's one of the major emphases that I put on planning for later life for solo agers is avoiding any possibility of isolation and loneliness as we get older. And as you'll see as I go through this, it can happen in a lot of different ways. So again, the cavalry arrives with social support. Social support will be the thing that enables us to avoid isolation and loneliness. It's really critical to being happy, being fulfilled, and having a meaningful life as we get into our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. We all, no matter how old you are, you have a potential support system that looks like this. While we're working, we have colleagues and we have other acquaintances that we may know through work. And we also have a cadre of friends. Some people have more, some people have fewer. We have, for many of us, we have some extended family. Some people have a huge extended family. Some people don't have as much as others. Some people have partners and significant others. Some people have close, what we call nuclear family. In other words, sisters, brothers, children, if you have them, parents that are still living. This is close family. And then, of course, we have our doctors and caregivers who also factor into that. But one by one, as we get older, this support system begins to disappear. Now, usually the first bubble that disappears is the colleagues, the people we know from work. Because eventually, most people do retire or go on to a career that is more easily fulfilled later in life. A lot of people don't retire at all these days, but they go on to do something that is a little less demanding on them physically as well as emotionally. So those colleagues from our midlife career tend to phase out of our life. And then the rest of these disappear at kind of unpredictable intervals. We just don't know who we're going to lose when. You know, the royals in England have an expression. They say they always need an heir and a spare. And I say that about friends. You cannot have too many friends in your social support system because we're going to lose some of those friends at some point. Maybe they move, maybe they pass on before us. There may be many reasons. They may become ill, but friends kind of move in and out of our life. So we always have to continue to nurture those kinds of relationships, the ones that we choose. Eventually, unfortunately, if we don't do that, what looms large in our life are the people we pay to take care of us, the doctors, the caregivers, the other support. And I don't know about you, but I don't want that to be the only support network that I have. So I'm going to work pretty hard, and I counsel all solo agers to do this. I'm going to work hard to maintain that support system that is going to be so important to me later in life, and it's already important to me without my even realizing it often throughout life. So where does the social support come from? Well, another way of looking at it is it can be family. I have a very good friend that I've known most of my life. We went to high school together. And she has four older sisters who all got married and had children. But my friend Linda did not. She instead stayed in school, got her PhD in zoology, and went on to spend a tremendous amount of time in the field. But she always came home to where we all grew up in California and stayed close to her sisters and eventually her nieces and nephews. So she has a huge extended family, even though she is technically a solo ager by virtue of the fact that she doesn't have kids. So it varies a lot. You may have a large number of extended family. You may have a very small extended family, or you may have none. Solo agers come in all different varieties. We have old friends, hopefully, and then it's important, as I mentioned before, to continue to make new friends so that you can replace the ones that leave your life. It sounds a little can sound a little harsh or a little cold or objective, but it's the reality. People can become our friends as they move into our neighborhood or as we move into their neighborhood. We might think of our past teachers as friends. Students that we've had might think of us as friends. And I know more than one person who has maintained a friendship with someone she taught decades ago, and that person is still very important in her life. So these relationships and connections can come from so many different quarters. And I put ministers in there partially to remind me that one of the ways of developing strong relationships is to join some kind of organization. And in many cases, that organization could be a religious group. Maybe you don't belong to a church or a synagogue or a mosque right now. Maybe you did in the past. One way to develop a much more robust social network is to join some kind of organized group like a congregation. These days, many quote unquote religious organizations are not very religious. So if you're not very religious, you still can probably find your tribe that way. But other people find it through volunteering. Many people get involved in the organization for which they volunteer and befriend other volunteers or people who work in that organization and do that for years. It can also come from the connections you have with your community. So there's so many ways that we can develop new relationships and connections as our old ones begin to kind of churn, and it happens. So I always tell solo agers, and this goes for anyone, but solo agers particularly need to plan in a much more robust way because they don't have what I call a safety net of children. And these are the experts that I think everyone should have a meeting or two with to understand where they are financially, legally, and where they are with regard to their expenses. It's by visiting a financial planner one time, and pretty much all financial planners now work on what they call a fee basis, where you pay for their time. And for $100, couple $100, you can really get a picture of what your income and outflow is now and what you can expect in the future, because we all need to be able to live within our means and be able to extend that out for our lifetime. So most financial advisors will extend that out to 93 or 97 and make sure that you're going to be able to support yourself for that amount of time. And if the answer is no, then it's time for some lifestyle changes. But these are the kinds of things that we need to know about ourselves before we can move forward confidently, knowing that we're going to be secure in our later years. It's also important to have some kind of an estate plan, so you know who you are, not only a will, so you know who you're going to leave your possessions to, but also who's going to make decisions for you if the time comes that you cannot. And again, we don't have a crystal ball. 70% of anyone who lives beyond 60 is likely to need care at some point in their life. Maybe not extended period of time, but I'm sure you've seen where people have had hip replacements or knee replacements, and they need care for a couple of weeks. They can't do much for themselves. Same with rotator cuff or whatever kind of surgery it might be. These are the kinds of plans that we need to make with regard to who's going to be our decision makers as we move up in years and as we risk the kinds of things that might disable us at some point. Now, I know it's hard to face these things. It's very difficult to think about ourselves in a disabled condition. And we all want to believe that we're going to just go blissfully through life and without a hitch, and then have a heart attack one day at age 93 out on the golf course. And that does happen to some people, but it doesn't happen to many. So acknowledging the fact that we are vulnerable to some conditions that befall us later in life is an important thing. To come to come to peace with that understanding. In addition to elder law attorneys and financial advisors, we in California, we have what's known as a professional fiduciary. And this professional fiduciary can actually play the role of the children that you don't have. That person can be engaged to make decisions for you later in life, can manage your estate for you. And again, these people are trained and licensed, and they have to keep up those licenses. They are what the term fiduciary means, they put your interests above their own. So if you are someone who's unsure about where that kind of support is going to come from because you don't have much family, I would definitely check out the Professional Fiduciary Association of California, because they may have some good answers for you. And then finally, people in certain income categories might want to consider a long-term care policy if it's affordable. In a sense, ensuring that when you do need care, it will be paid for, at least in part, for you. And then, of course, the big question of where should solo agers live? And I get asked this question a lot. There's lots of different options. Today, we have a number of options that exist already. You've all probably had experience with or know someone who lives in a 55 plus community. There's no aid there per se, but in a 55 plus community, it means you can't move in until you're 55 or older, can't live there. And that your unit, if you're in a condominium that's 55 plus, or your mobile home, or your home in like a Del Webb community, is usually smaller than the home that you may have been used to when you were younger. It's small, it's on one level. Often much of the grounds are kept by the homeowners association and by other people than you. So it allows you to kind of take that first step into senior living. And then there's a life plan community, also known as a continuing care community. Those are the kind of standard senior living opportunities, assisted living, and then the thing we all want to avoid, a nursing home. But there are other ways that you can avoid isolation and loneliness without moving into a senior living facility. You can consider home sharing, living with others who have similar interests to you. There are even organizations today online that will help match you with someone. Or maybe you want to join forces and move in with a friend. There's co-housing or other kinds of intentional communities. If you are thinking seriously about where you're going to live in later life as a solo ager, I would encourage you to check out the options that I'm naming when you have a chance online, because I can't go into very much detail on any one of them at this point. You might also live with extended family. And of course, you can take your chances and live alone. If you're evaluating fiduciaries and trustees, people you want to name in your estate for taking care of your estate, or for taking care of you later in life, then you need to kind of gauge them against these four measures. Are they trustworthy? Are they capable? Are they available, both physically and emotionally? And are they compatible with the other beneficiaries or trustees that you might name? So, for instance, I have a couple of nieces that I would consider to name as on my advance directive for healthcare, somebody that might make decisions for me as I get older. And especially if I am incapable of making those decisions myself, and I might be. I chose one niece over the other because I think she is more emotionally prepared to do this. So again, we have to make some decisions, and it's important to talk to the people that we engage to be our fiduciaries and trustees. So legal and financial preparation, again, can encompass all of these areas. In addition to the finances and the estate planning and the long-term care insurance, which I've mentioned, your final wishes are something that is important to consider. Nobody should die what we call intestate. In other words, without a will and without any plans for the future. I had a relative that did that, and it really threw his family into chaos for quite a long time. It's important to think about what we want when our time is up. We can, as my father did, pick out a burial plot somewhere that seemed attractive to him. My father did this when I was, I was probably still in my 20s. And he wanted to talk to me about it. He wanted me to come and see the burial plot, and he wanted to talk to me about what was in his will and where the key to his safe deposit box was. I mean, he knew that someone had to handle all of that. But at 25 years of age, I just didn't want to hear about it. However, he wore me down. And finally, I got the whole spiel. I got to go see where the plot was. I got to meet the funeral home director. I knew everything that my father wanted. And you know what? 15 years later, when he did die, I knew exactly what to do. It's the kindest thing that you can do for whoever is going to be taking over your estate when your time is up. So have those discussions with whoever is in your support network, whoever you're relying on to be there to pick up the mantle when you cannot anymore. It's important to have those discussions and to keep good records and to let people know where those records are. So this is one more way of looking at what adult children typically provide for their parents. And the reason I like to look at this is because those of us who don't have children are going to need to think about these things in our future and think about who is going to be the one who will be tasked with handling these things when we no longer can. And as you well know, there are other reasons that we might not be able to handle these things as we get older. Other reasons then that we have a heart attack and die one day. We may be incapacitated in so many different ways. And it's something that we hope doesn't happen, but it's also something to be prepared for if it does. So who's going to pay the bills, handle your money, make sure that your mortgage is paid if you are still in your home, make sure that your rent is paid or other bills that need handling every month, help you with medication, legal representation, all of these kinds of things, in addition to the so critical emotional support. So we need these support people around us to do these things. So the question becomes, are you going to pay for it, or are you going to ask a friend or acquaintance or somebody you're close to be there for you? I will tell you what my husband and I have done. We have made arrangements with a cousin of mine who is 15 years younger, who I assume is still going to be in good shape when I'm going downhill in some way or other. And she will be the one to step in and make sure that I'm taken care of in some way. I don't expect her to move me into her home, but I do expect that she will make sure that I'm in a good, safe place and that my interests are being looked after in some way. And I've had the conversation with her because I don't know when that's going to happen, and I want to make sure that she's comfortable with it. And we'll continue to talk about it as the years go by, so that by the time the day comes when she has to do something, she really does know what she needs to do, just the way I did when my father died. So the journey ahead is unknown. There'll undoubtedly be some twists and turns. There'll be some things that we aren't prepared for as much as we tried, but the more things that we can prepare for, the better. And today, there's so much help available. There's the equivalent of maps and GPS for our journey in the way of experts to help us with these things. And so I encourage everyone listening to this to make sure that you and the solo agers around you take the initiative to really prepare for the journey ahead as best you can. And this is, again, who I am. This is the book that I wrote about retirement planning for solo agers. It has all of the things that I've been talking about are included in this book, in addition to a number of worksheets and other things to help you locate and the resources you need and come to terms with your own feelings about what you want to do as you get older.